Have you ever heard of Nimrod? The first great leader of humanity after the flood. A man known for his strength, charisma, and ambition. But what happens when that ambition goes beyond the limits and defies God himself? In today's video, you'll discover the meteoric rise of Nimrod, a man who built cities, conquered peoples, and dreamed of unifying the world under his empire. However, in trying to achieve the impossible and defying divine will, he met his downfall. Let's explore how the desire for power and arrogance can lead to downfall, and what this ancient story teaches us about humility, limits, and the importance of following God's plan. If you've ever felt that success was within your grasp, but something held you back, this story is for you. Come and learn about Nimrod's impressive rise and fall, and how his story still resonates today. But first, make sure you subscribe to the channel and help us spread the message of God's word to more people. That said, let's get to the story of Nimrod, found in chapter 10 of the book of Genesis. Imagine a world just beginning to reorganize itself. The waters of the flood had already subsided, and Noah and his descendants were spreading across the land, trying to rebuild what had been lost. It is in this scene of renewal that the impressive figure of Nimrod emerges. His name is mentioned in Scripture as the first mighty man on earth, Genesis 10:8-9. But what does that mean exactly? Well, it wasn't just about physical strength. Of course, Nimrod was a strong man with exceptional hunting skills. When the Bible says he was a mighty hunter before the Lord, it highlights that his abilities went beyond the ordinary, something so impressive that even God took note. He hunted not only animals, but was also a strategist in controlling men. His dominion over wildlife symbolized his capacity to govern and lead others, both in times of peace and conflict. Now try to picture Nimrod, an imposing man with a determined gaze and hands hardened from work and battles. His physique was robust, the result of years of confrontations in the wilderness and hunting fields. But beyond physical strength, he possessed a strategic mind. He knew how to command respect, and at times, instill fear in those around him. Those who followed him saw in him a natural leader, someone destined to command and guide his people to a better future. And indeed, that's what he did. Nimrod, with his leadership skills, began to build something no one before him had achieved: an empire. The word empire might sound grand, and it truly was. Nimrod's power was not limited to his hunting abilities or physical strength. He had the gift of gathering people, inspiring them to follow his footsteps, whether through admiration or fear. He knew from the beginning that leadership wasn't just about muscles or courage in battle. It was about how to control hearts and minds, and Nimrod did this with mastery. He began organizing the first cities after the flood, something no other man had attempted with such success. And this organizational power was also remarkable. In a world where each family was trying to survive on their own, Nimrod emerged as a visionary leader. He understood that together, men could achieve far greater feats than when separated. Under his leadership, men united to form communities, and entire cities arose under his command. That's how he began to build his empire. But Nimrod's strength didn't lie only in his muscles or his ability to build cities. His real strength was in the way he could manipulate and control the people around him, becoming one of the first great rulers in biblical history. However, it's important to remember that Nimrod's fame didn't come without challenges. Like any great leader, he faced opposition, enemies who tried to undermine his power. But his strength, both physical and mental, prevailed. He knew how to defend himself and how to attack, whether on the battlefields or in the political intrigues that began to arise as more and more cities were born under his leadership. Nimrod wasn't just a hunter, he was a conqueror, a strategist, and above all, a leader of men. Therefore, Nimrod's story begins to take shape as someone who not only survived the post-flood chaos, but prospered, using his strength and intelligence to create something enduring. However, as we will see later, the very strength and ambition that brought him to the top would also place him on a collision course with God's plan. But in this first moment of his story, Nimrod symbolizes human power in its most raw and, at the same time, most impressive form. Nimrod was not just a strong and charismatic leader, he was a man of insatiable ambition. His desire for power was not limited to ruling his generation. He wanted to leave a legacy, something that would transcend time. It was then that he began building cities, each a testament to his greatness. Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh, Genesis 10:10, were more than just simple cities. They were the beginning of what he believed to be an indestructible empire. Each brick laid was a symbol of his strength, and the people who followed him saw him not merely as a king, but almost as a divine figure, someone who seemed to be above mortals. Among all his conquests, Babel was the most ambitious. This city, built on a fertile plain, was intended to be the heart of Nimrod's empire, and there, in Babel, he led one of the boldest projects in human history, the construction of a tower that would reach the heavens. The idea behind the Tower of Babel was much deeper than it appeared. It wasn't just a grand physical structure, it was a symbol. It symbolized humanity's desire to become like God, to take control of its own destiny without relying on anyone, not even the Creator. Nimrod and his people wanted a name for themselves. They wanted to be remembered forever as the men who conquered the heavens. Now imagine that tower, immense, rising higher and higher with its firm foundations and its levels towering above the earth. Each day, workers stacked bricks and stones, as if they were trying to challenge the very limits of humanity. The construction became a beacon, visible from far away, a declaration of independence and power. Nimrod was convinced that by raising this tower, his name would echo through eternity, and that he would be remembered as the leader who not only united men, but placed them on the same level as God. For him, this project wasn't just a physical monument, but a mark of his eternal ambition. However, something was deeply wrong in this pursuit. The purpose behind the Tower of Babel wasn't just architectural, it was an attempt to defy God himself. In building the tower, Nimrod and his people were essentially saying, "We can be like God. We can control our destiny and reach the heavens on our own." But God's plan for humanity was clear from the beginning. They were to spread across the earth, multiply, and fill every corner of creation. Nimrod, however, wanted the opposite. He wanted to centralize power, keep everyone together in one place, consolidating his authority and ensuring his kingdom would never fragment. This arrogance and desire for self-exaltation marked the beginning of Nimrod's downfall. He didn't realize that in trying to climb so high, he was digging his own ruin. His pride blinded him to the fundamental truth that no man, no matter how powerful, could challenge the divine order. In his pursuit to build something that would make him immortal in the eyes of men, he was distancing himself further and further from God. It was an ancient lesson that Nimrod seemed to ignore. Unbridled ambition, when not aligned with God's purpose, leads to destruction. As the tower rose, so did the spiritual tension. God watched the construction not as a simple tower, but as an act of rebellion. Nimrod didn't just want fame, he wanted absolute control. He wanted his name to be more important than any other, even God's. But in his attempt to exalt himself, he was about to learn a harsh lesson about humility and obedience. The tower that was supposed to lead Nimrod and his people to the heavens was, in reality, leading them to their own downfall. And so, the construction of Babel became the symbol of unchecked human ambition and divine intervention. What began as the height of an empire was about to mark the beginning of its fall. As the Tower of Babel rose higher and higher, divine attention also turned toward the earth. God watched closely what was happening in Babel, and what he saw wasn't just a majestic tower being built, but an act of collective rebellion against his plan for humanity. The intentions behind the project were clear to the Creator. The men were not building to glorify God, but to exalt themselves. Human arrogance had reached new heights, and at the center of it all was Nimrod, the leader commanding this movement of human exaltation. God decided to intervene decisively. He saw that if the project continued, humans would persist in disobeying his commands. God's original plan was for humanity to spread and fill the earth, but instead, they were uniting in one place, trying to create a centralized power that defied the divine purpose. The construction of the Tower of Babel was, in fact, an attempt to subvert God's command for scattering and diversity. Ultimately, what Nimrod wanted was to keep people under his control, united in a single empire, and not dispersed according to God's will. Then God came down to see what men were doing. Genesis 11:5. This act of coming down is not to be understood literally, but as a direct and attentive intervention. God saw the hearts of men, saw their motivations, and understood that the Tower project symbolized much more than bricks and mortar. It was the ultimate expression of human arrogance. Instead of letting them continue on this path of self-destruction, he decided to act, bringing a correction that would change the course of history forever. In his infinite wisdom, God did not destroy the tower with a simple touch of his power. He did something far more profound. He confused the language of the people working on the construction. Imagine the scene. Men who had worked side by side suddenly could no longer understand each other. The unity that existed in communication dissolved into chaos. The instructions for the work were lost in the air, and the workers looked at each other, not knowing what to do, unable to continue with the construction. What was once a well-coordinated team turned into complete confusion. It was as if an invisible barrier had been raised between them. This confusion of languages was the fatal blow to Nimrod's project. Without the ability to communicate, the work on the tower came to a halt. The dream of a great tower reaching the heavens and of a centralized empire crumbled right there. Nimrod's leadership, based on unity and collective power, was shattered by God's judgment. The confusion caused by the change in languages forced people to scatter across the earth, exactly as God had commanded from the beginning. The divine plan for scattering was fulfilled not by human obedience but by God's direct intervention. Nations began to form from that moment on. Groups that could understand each other separated and migrated to different parts of the earth. The construction of the tower was abandoned, and Babel became a place of bitter memory, a reminder of how human arrogance can lead to downfall. What began as a grand project meant to glorify men ended in ruins. God's judgment was a clear warning that no matter how shrewd and powerful men might be, no one could resist his will. Nimrod's empire, which seemed so promising and unified, was now fragmented. The great leader who had gathered so many people under his command saw his empire dissipate before his eyes. What he had built with so much effort, the dream of a centralized kingdom, of a name that would be remembered forever, disintegrated in an instant. The story of the Tower of Babel marks the turning point in Nimrod's life, as God's judgment revealed that no man, no matter how strong or shrewd, could defy the divine order without consequences. Nimrod's once unshakable power was broken, and the world he tried to control scattered, fragmented into different nations, cultures, and languages. This moment serves as an eternal reminder that God's sovereignty is above any human project. The attempt to exalt oneself and control destiny, when contrary to God's will, inevitably leads to ruin. The judgment of Babel was a lesson for all humanity. Men can build great things, but it is God who sets the limits on their ambitions. Even after the fall of the Tower of Babel and the end of the project that marked the height of his ambition, Nimrod did not disappear from history. Quite the opposite. His influence remained alive through the peoples he fathered and the cities he founded. According to the biblical account, Nimrod was responsible for establishing the powerful region of Babylon, Genesis 10:10. Babylon was not just an ordinary city. It became a center of power and influence, a symbol of civilization but also of rebellion against God. The lineage of Nimrod and the conquests he inspired spread across the land, planting the seeds of great empires that would emerge in the future. The culture that emerged from Babylon and the neighboring regions reflected Nimrod's spirit, powerful, militarily organized, and with impressive architecture. We cannot forget that Babylon would become one of the most advanced cities of antiquity, known for its massive walls, towering temples, and its influence throughout the ancient world. The nations that descended from Nimrod, such as the Assyrians, followed his example. They stood out for their military strength, their ability to conquer territories, and, like Nimrod, their tendency to centralize power in large cities. Nimrod is often considered the father of these empires. Through his lineage, peoples arose that would stand out as regional powers for centuries. Babylon and Assyria, for example, became names associated with power, wealth, and military dominance. These empires not only built cities but also erected civilizations that would influence the art, science, and politics of their times. The grand architecture that Nimrod began later evolved into historical landmarks still remembered today, such as the Hanging Gardens of Babylon and the monumental ziggurats. However, this historical influence was not entirely positive. Nimrod's name also became associated with rebellion and arrogance. He is remembered not only as a great builder, but also as the leader who directly defied God's will by attempting to establish his own kingdom apart from the divine plan. He became an example of what happens when man tries to create his own greatness without considering the Creator. His attempt to centralize power in Babel and unite humanity under his authority resulted in fragmentation and confusion. This left a deep mark on both spiritual and secular history. Babylon, for example, became associated with moral and spiritual decay. It would become a biblical symbol of rebellion against God, especially in the prophetic books and Revelation. Thus, Nimrod's legacy was twofold. On the one hand, he was the founder of great empires, nations that prospered and influenced the world significantly. On the other hand, he became the archetype of the leader who exalts himself and tries to create a kingdom far from divine principles, which led him to be remembered as someone whose pride and arrogance distanced him from God. This contradictory legacy teaches us much. It reveals that power, no matter how impressive, can be used for good or evil. The great nations that Nimrod founded shaped the history of the ancient world, but many of them followed the path of rebellion, oppression, and separation from God. And this shows us how dangerous it is to try to build greatness apart from divine will. Nimrod's name did not fade with the dispersion of Babel, but his influence continued to resonate for centuries, serving both as an example of power and as a warning. The story of Nimrod and the peoples he spawned is a powerful reminder that true greatness cannot be built against God's plans. His empires were great, his conquests remarkable, but his name was also forever associated with the pride that led to his downfall. Nimrod's impact is felt not only in the biblical narratives, but also in secular history, which records the rise and fall of empires that, although strong, were unable to withstand time or divine sovereignty. Nimrod's story, as impressive as it is tragic, offers us a timeless lesson on the dangers of arrogance and unchecked ambition. Nimrod was a man who possessed everything many would consider necessary for success: physical strength, charisma, leadership ability, and the capacity to gather crowds around him. He built cities, established an empire, and left his mark on history. But with all that power and influence, there was something he didn't understand: the importance of recognizing that no matter how grand our achievements, there is a limit imposed by God's will. Nimrod was not just a leader, he was a visionary. He dreamed big and wasn't afraid to act on those visions. He saw the opportunity to unite humanity under one kingdom, under his rule. And in human eyes, this might have seemed like a noble cause. After all, unity brings strength. But the problem lay in the motivation behind his ambition. Nimrod didn't want to unite men for the common good or the glory of God. He wanted to do it to exalt himself, to consolidate his name and power. He wanted to be remembered as the man who defied the heavens and built something eternal on earth. And here lies the root of the lesson that Nimrod's story teaches us. His downfall was a direct result of his lack of humility. By trying to place himself above God, by seeking to build his own glory instead of glorifying the Creator, he sealed his fate. The Tower of Babel, the ultimate symbol of his ambition, was also the scene of his defeat. God confused the languages and scattered the people, and what was left was only an unfinished monument and a crumbled empire. This story reminds us that no matter how far we progress, there will always be a power greater than our own. Humility, then, is the key to understanding this. Nimrod tried to unite humanity based on his own glory, but he forgot that true unity comes from following God's will. He desired his name to be exalted, but the name he left behind was that of a leader who defied divine order. The lesson here is clear. Our greatest human achievements, no matter how impressive, can quickly fall apart if they are not aligned with God's plan. When we try to build something without recognizing divine sovereignty, we end up like Nimrod, facing the reality that our power is limited. This lesson is just as relevant today as it was in ancient times. We live in a world where ambition and the desire for greatness still motivate many to seek success at any cost. People build their own Towers of Babel, trying to reach the top without considering God's will. But Nimrod's story shows us that no matter how high the buildings we erect, if they don't have a foundation in humility and obedience to the Creator, they are destined to fall. There is no lasting greatness without the wisdom to recognize our own limits. True wisdom, then, is not about how high we can build, but how deeply we understand our place before God. Nimrod's story is a reminder that humility is the path to avoiding a fall. When we seek to glorify ourselves, we move away from our true purpose. But when we submit to God's plan, we discover there is greater strength in acknowledging our smallness before the greatness of God. Nimrod teaches us that ambition without limits, without humility, leads only to ruin. True wisdom lies in knowing how far we can go and, more importantly, when we must stop and submit to the greater plan. The fall of Nimrod is a powerful reminder that we are not self-sufficient. We can build, conquer, unite. But if we are not aligned with God's will, it will all be in vain. What keeps us standing is the humility to recognize that there is something much bigger than us, a divine purpose that governs history. And unlike Nimrod, we must learn to seek that purpose instead of trying to build our own empires. Though Nimrod's story is mentioned relatively briefly in the scriptures, the impact of his life and actions extends across generations. He is remembered as the first great leader after the flood, a powerful man who led the building of cities and sought to consolidate humanity under his authority. But he is also remembered as one who directly defied the divine order, ignoring God's command for men to spread out and fill the earth. Nimrod's ambition, expressed in the construction of the Tower of Babel, became the ultimate symbol of the futility of human arrogance, the attempt to reach the heavens by one's own merit, and the desire to control destiny without considering God's sovereignty. The story of the Tower of Babel, ancient as it may be, still resonates strongly today. It echoes as a reminder and a warning of the dangers of excessive centralization of power and the relentless pursuit of control. In modern times, we live in a world where ambition and the desire for power often drive individuals, nations, and corporations to seek greatness at any cost. Nimrod's story reminds us that whenever we try to build something purely for our own glory, without considering God's will, we are following the same path as Babel, a path that inevitably leads to fragmentation and ruin. Looking at the society around us, we can see how the desire to centralize power and achieve the impossible still shapes human behavior. The Tower of Babel may no longer be a physical construction today, but it lives on in various forms, in the endless pursuit of wealth, in authoritarian control, in the manipulation of the masses, and in the desire for fame and glory at any price. The question Nimrod's story forces us to ask is clear. Why are we building what we are building? Is it for our own exaltation? To make our name known? Or are we truly following a greater purpose aligned with God's will? Nimrod sought to unite humanity under a centralized empire, and this ambition, which seemed grand at first, was revealed to be a dangerous attempt to control human destiny. He believed he could defy the natural order established by God, and his story ends as a clear example of how the pursuit of power, when unchecked by humility, leads to downfall. In today's world, where technology, politics, and economic power intertwine, we are often confronted with leaders and systems that seem to repeat the same story. The centralization of power in individuals or institutions that ignore divine ethics and morality is a constant warning of the danger that comes with a lack of humility. But Nimrod's impact is not limited to the past or to great leaders. His story speaks directly to each of us. The lesson is personal and profound. At some point, we all face the temptation to build something for our own glory. It might be our career, our reputation, or even our possessions. Nimrod's story challenges us to question our motivations and reflect on the true reason behind our efforts. Are we building for God's glory or merely feeding our own ego? Are we seeking to fulfill the divine plan for our lives, or are we straying, trying to create our own path? Nimrod also serves as a metaphor for the empires and systems of power that rise and fall throughout history. He is the archetype of those who attempt to create kingdoms apart from God's will, and the end result is always the same: ruin and dispersion. Even the most powerful empires of the past, Babylon, Rome, Greece, all eventually fell, despite their greatness and strength. Nimrod's lesson is that human power, no matter how impressive it may seem, is always limited when compared to God's plan. Today, this story continues to serve as a reminder that we should not place our trust in human constructions but in the Creator. No matter how hard we try to achieve great things, without God's blessing and guidance, they are destined to fail. Nimrod's narrative invites us to reassess our priorities, to seek humility, and to recognize that true greatness lies not in defying God, but in submitting to His plan. Nimrod's story echoes today as a call for reflection. Are we living for ourselves, seeking power and recognition at any cost? Or are we building something greater, something that resonates with divine purpose? Nimrod tried to reach the heavens by his own hand, and the result was his fall. The lesson is clear. True power, true glory comes from following God's will and recognizing that without Him, any human effort is like the Tower of Babel, destined to fragment and fall. Write in the comments if you have already meditated on the story of Nimrod. May God bless your life. See you in the next video.